Here we have Britney's chart. I am a shameless fan of Britney's since I was 12. The first concert I ever went to was an NSYNC concert. And on the way, I found out that Britney Spears was opening. I had no idea who she was. I thought she was somebody who went to the other middle school that we were going to meet. And I was like, oh no, this is the performer. And it was Britney Spears. And she came out in this sparkly astronaut suit. And then, I fell in love with Justin Timberlake, and I just kind of followed Britney's career. And also it turns out we have the exact same rising sign, like to the degree, 2.5 degrees of Libra. But I've just been kind of fascinated by her, and then really followed her, the Free Britney movement early on, and then kind of saw it get bigger and bigger and bigger until she broke free from her conservatorship that she was in for 13 years, that her dad controlled her money and every aspect of her life. So I thought she would be a really interesting person to do a reading for. So first I'm going to do her birth chart, and then we'll look at some of the major moments in her life and look at what transits were happening then for her. Britney was born on December 2nd, 1981 at 1:30 a.m. And she was born when the sun was in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a fire sign represented by the centaur, which is a very physically active, gregarious, just fiery, ambitious. It's represented by the arrow because it is a sign that has high ambitions and likes to travel far, and is just a tremendous force of physical energy towards its goal. And Sagittarians tend to be very outspoken and honest, and kind of they can be kind of like blunt. And if you have seen Britney Spears, she just kind of has this very outgoing, funny, she's very, what's the word? Sometimes brash, and she just will say anything and kind of has no filter. And she is somebody who gets very fiery and fired up and will speak her truth with a lot of fire behind it. And she has, Sagittarius is a sign that's very oriented towards high moral and ethical behavior. And then she has her moon in Aquarius, and Aquarius is very freedom oriented, wants to, has, the moon in our chart speaks to our emotional needs, what we need on an emotional level. And Aquarius is a sign of freedom. And so it's also a very eccentric sign. Aquarians want to be, they don't mind being different. They want to individuate. And again, if you see Britney's, even just looking at her Instagram, she just has this very eccentric, kind of quirky personality. And it's very airy and kind of lighthearted. Again, the moon representing how we relate with our emotions, having the moon in an air sign, gives her an ability to kind of look at her emotions from a detached perspective. And while she's very fiery and passionate, she is able to have a little bit of space, air with her emotions and her feelings. And so she doesn't drown in, she doesn't maybe drown in her emotions in the way that people who have a lot of water in their chart may have a tendency towards. And so, one thing I just want to mention is that when you're doing a birth chart for somebody like a celebrity that obviously I don't know Britney, and I am just looking at, again, how I see these archetypes playing out in her. And when I'm doing a reading for someone I don't know, I want to be very open-ended, because there's a lot of different ways any of these archetypes can manifest in our lives. So archetypes, are these kind of mental, psychological, mythological structures in our unconscious that exist in the collective unconscious that transcend the individual. But they are kind of like a diamond or a prism, in that they can have many different manifestations. And so when I'm doing a chart for someone like a celebrity, I'm going to be speaking to how I see these archetypes playing out in her, based on my, limited knowledge of her. But as a person who has grown up in the public eye and has a very public persona, you can see the themes that are playing out in her life. So her rising sign is Libra. Again, the rising sign represents the overall themes that are at play in our life. You can kind of think of the rising sign as the stained glass through which all of your chart kind of flows or filters through. So it's our most publicly facing self. It's the mask or the ego, the mask that we wear to interact with the world. And so if your rising sign is different than your sun and your moon, the way that you initially present yourself may be very different than who you are once you maybe feel safe, or once somebody gets to know you better. But more than just your public persona, your rising sign, again, represents the overall themes that will be at play in your life. And so Libra is ruled by Venus, and it is all about balance, justice, harmony, beauty, aesthetics. And it's a very pleasing oriented. It's very oriented towards pleasant things, and Libra tends to be a pleaser. And so Britney's, her way of presenting herself tends to be very pleasant and feminine and passive and pleasing. And you can kind of see this with how long it took her to really speak up for herself. And she speaks to the ways in which, being a child star, and the way that her career was influenced by her father's power and control issues and, greed. But she was trying to make everyone happy, and she has this very pleasing persona. And so it kind of speaks to these different aspects of her, where her rising sign is very pleasing, doesn't want to rock the boat. Libra can be conflict averse and wants to smooth everything over. But Sagittarius is very outspoken and is not afraid to speak one's truth, even if it burns, right? It's a little fiery. And so when you look at a chart, we want to look at, again, the rising sign, and then the planetary ruler associated with your rising sign is considered the ruler of your chart. And so for Libra is ruled by Venus. And so Britney's Venus is the ruler of her chart. And that's kind of the focal point of her chart. And it means that she's more influenced by Venus than any other planet. And Venus is the planet of beauty and art and harmony. And for her, it's in the sign of Capricorn. And Capricorn is very hardworking, disciplined, mature. Britney worked from a very, very young age, and she worked under the control of her father. And Britney's Venus at 25 degrees of Capricorn. So again, Venus being her creativity. Venus also rules our money and our value. And so all of her Venus and Capricorn, hardworking, creative value, and the value that she was able to work for and earn through her art. This Venus at 25 degrees is squaring Pluto in her first house. And her Venus is also conjuncting her south node. The north node, again, is up here at 23 degrees of Cancer. And so her north node representing what she's wanting to move towards, which is moving towards kind of that mother archetype. And that's something that she's talked about a lot, is wanting to have another child, and to just enjoy those Cancer themes of having a home and a family and being the nurturer. And the opposite of the north node, they don't show it as a point on this chart, but you can look at 180 degrees opposite of the north node, and her south node is at 23 degrees of Capricorn, which is conjuncting Venus. So the south node is again where you're really strong. And so for her, the influence of, her past lives or her karma or her early life, however you want to think about it, was in the sign of Capricorn. So again, hard work, maturity, responsibility, obligations. And Capricorn is associated with the father and discipline, control. And so, the south node representing what you're really strong at in your early life. It's interesting that her south node is conjunct this Venus, and she gained success at such an early age through her very hard work, through her artistic career. And now she's really trying to move towards the Cancer archetype and leaving the south node behind of work and control and discipline. Again, she had this conservatorship for 13 years where she was forced essentially to work endlessly, in a way that was externally controlled, that she didn't get to choose how she wanted to make her art. Again, Venus is our art, our creativity, how we approach relationships. And this conjunction of Venus and the south node at 23 degrees of Cancer is squares are these 90-degree angles between planets where there's a tension, there's a harsh tension that causes a lot of conflict. So Saturn represents the father, represents control, limits, restriction, boundaries, and Pluto representing power, death, transformation. Both of these major planets are squaring her south node in Capricorn. When you have Saturn and Pluto in the first house, that brings these themes of, Saturn being, again, more themes of hard work, maturity, restriction, limits, control, and Pluto being power. So one way you can see this is just her intense, and the first house represents our sense of self, our persona, the way that we look. It can be our physical body. It can be how we express ourselves, externally through our style. And so one way you see this is just that she's incredibly disciplined. She worked really hard as a dancer, and a performer. And Pluto is just like that power and drive and magnetism. So having Pluto in your first house can bring an intensity to you, can bring a magnetic draw. It's kind of similar to having Scorpio rising. So having Pluto in your first house brings kind of similar themes as having a Scorpio rising, because Pluto is Scorpio's ruling planet. And having Saturn in your first house is similar to having a Capricorn rising, because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, but again, bringing a sense of discipline, hard work, responsibility, maturity, restriction. So obviously her life has been deeply influenced by the restrictions that have been placed on her, and the control through her conservatorship, that she wasn't able to make choices for herself. We can see that she has Jupiter, the planet of expansion, fortune, in the second house. And the second house represents our earned income and our sense of value. So Jupiter in the second house is considered very fortunate in terms of drawing money and resources. And Jupiter also is where we're expanding. So for her, she's experiencing expansion through exploring Scorpio themes of death and rebirth, renewal, power, transformation. This is February 16th, 2007. And this is the day that Britney had the famous incident where she shaved her head and, drew all of this paparazzi attention, and the world labeled her as crazy. And so I just put around 10 p.m. Because I don't know exactly what time, but I know it was dark out. So it was nighttime. So what we see here is what kind of stands out about that incident to me is this kind of erratic nature of her behavior. So I think of the planet Uranus as the planet of awakening. It often leads to breakdowns, to breakthrough. So whereas Pluto is about death and renewal, Pluto is the planet of complete destruction so that a rebirth can happen. Uranus is about breakdown and breakthrough. So it often helps us to awaken to a higher state of consciousness, or a new paradigm. But there has to be this breakthrough that often is sudden and unexpected, and can have this erratic kind of shocking nature to it. And so if you look at Uranus, Uranus was at 13 degrees of Pisces. And it was conjuncting the North Node in Pisces. And that's in her sixth house of work. And it's squaring her sun. We also have Mars at 23 degrees of Capricorn, which again, 23 degrees of Capricorn is her south node. So at this moment, Uranus is squaring her natal sun, and Mars is conjuncting her south node. And again, south node represents the imprint of the past, and where we tend to get stuck. For her, that's conjuncting her Venus and Capricorn, and transiting Mars is activating that past karma for her. So this is the moment that kind of leads her into the conservatorship. And then the next one that I'm going to do is January 4th, 2019, which is when she decides that she's going, which is kind of represents the beginning of the end of the conservatorship for her, because it's the day that she announces that she's going to stop working. So again, this incident in 2007 leads to her, being stigmatized and labeled as having a mental illness and not being able to be competent for herself, which leads her into this very controlling conservatorship. And in January 4th of 2019 is the day that she decides that she's taking an indefinite hiatus from her Las Vegas residency, where she's been working very, very hard and under her father's control. And so on this day, there was an eclipse in Capricorn. So again, her south node conjunct Venus in Capricorn. Pluto, transiting Pluto, is at 20 degrees of Capricorn. Pluto represents death and destruction. So Pluto is starting to impact her south node, and it's creating a massive process. It's initiating a massive process of death and transformation of her south node, karma related to these Capricorn themes of work and control. And so Pluto being the slowest moving planet, it's going to take several years to transit, for this whole transit to occur. So this is when, this is now 3 degrees from her south node. So that's influencing the situation. And then there's this solar eclipse that happens that day. The moon is going to come along and conjunct the sun, which is a new moon. And when there's a new moon in the sign that the south node is in, that is an eclipse. So the eclipses are related to the north and the south nodes of the moon. So eclipses happen in a pair of signs that correlate with where the north and the south node are. And so the north and the south node will be in a pair of signs for about 13 months, between a year and a year and a half, or between a year and a half to 2 years. And so in 2019, the eclipses were just beginning in the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, which are her north and south nodes. So this indicates a time of a lot of massive changes. And so this eclipse. So this is one of the first eclipses in the Cancer, on the Cancer Capricorn axis. And so we can see again this process happening where with Pluto now starting to conjunct her south node. At this moment, you also see that her Jupiter transiting Jupiter at this time at 12 degrees of Sagittarius was conjuncting her sun. And again, Jupiter is about expansion, freedom. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So her sun is in Sagittarius. So Jupiter is in alignment with her sun. So when Jupiter has an alignment with a planet, it expands that. It brings it into focus. It brings luck, growth, expansion. And so she's having the planet of luck and abundance and growth and expansion conjuncting her sun. And this is the beginning of her freedom. Then we have, let's see, not that. So the final one I'll do was June 23rd, 2021. So this is the day that she speaks to the court, saying that she wants out of her conservatorship and sharing to the world. She says, I lied. I actually am not happy. I lied to the world, said everything was fine. It's not fine. This is abusive. My dad, she says that her dad should be in jail. And so when you look at this day, first of all, Pluto is now at 26 degrees of Capricorn. So it has completed, it's on the end of this process that she has been going through, where there's been this Pluto conjunct her South Node in Capricorn, huge release of restriction, control, Capricorn themes of work, and just this karma that she has had related to work. And again, in her fourth house of her family, the fourth house is the family and home. And so she also has, on this day, transiting Saturn was at an exact 12 degrees of Aquarius, exactly conjuncting her natal moon. So Saturn, again, restriction, limits, boundaries. So she is speaking, she is saying, this is my boundary, like I'm done. And the moon represents freedom. So again, her emotional need for freedom, Saturn at exactly 12 degrees. This is this moment of her really taking taking responsibility for her emotional freedom and drawing this huge emotional boundary. And that Saturn in Aquarius is making this 120-degree harmonious trine to Mercury in Gemini, which was conjuncting the North Node in Gemini. And, Mercury being about communication. And then, Venus is conjuncting her North Node in 23 degrees. So highlighting her North Node of wanting to move towards having, one of the restrictions of her conservatorship was that she wasn't able to have her own children. And again, so the North Node being Cancer, the mother archetype.